Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a trend that's going on with Gen Y, and it's being called a passion problem in the workforce. And I'll tell you, being an employer and someone who's employed quite a few people in my history, thousands at this point, there was a distinct difference between the Gen X workers and the Gen Y workers. And Gen Y, if you look at those generations, that's from the 80s through the 2000s. And the biggest issue, I think, for both Gen X and Gen Y is the health problems. There's been several articles, one that recently came out, the Harvard Business Review, that said that the health conditions of Gen Y and Gen X are worse than the previous generation, which was the worry generation, or the baby boomers, etc. So that's not surprising because sedentary lifestyles have taken over, and the lifestyles of being in an urban environment, not a lot of people live rurally anymore. So in urban environments, you don't have to work for your food and those type things physically. You basically buy your food at the grocery store and do these type things, and you live in a house or an apartment in the city, but you have a small yard, an acre or less that you take care of. You're most likely not feeding cows, feeding horses, feeding chickens, doing all that stuff all day long, multiple times a day, and not milking cows 3 times a day if you have a dairy farm. So it's not surprising to see that the health is falling off on Gen Y and Gen X. The other thing I would call it is this: the foods that people eat now are moved away from their starting point quite drastically, and the additives, the chemicals in your water and in your food are basically plastics and things that are deadly for us. That's why you see the increase in cancer. And that's something that is not being called out as often as it should. I watched a video by Mr. Kennedy yesterday, and he was talking about just the dyes that are used in food, which basically started out as industrial products, and now that's being used in foods. And if Trump wins this next election, he's going to be the health czar over the food. He's going to try to get a lot of these things banned in the United States. They're already banned in all the other countries of the world, but here we're allowing people to put that in the food that our children eat and that our families eat. So I think the focus around X and Y also includes some of these derivatives that the prior generations didn't have to wrestle with. Also, a lot of the prior generations, they had food that they grew in their own homes. And the reason I'm mentioning food impacts the way you carry yourself, your demeanor. It impacts your energy, so it's going to impact how you respond at work. So in this article, it says Gen Y has a passion problem. It says basically Gen Y has been called the worst generation, and because it's suggesting that they're pampered and high maintenance. And basically, the New York Times called Generation Y bother earlier this year, noting perhaps that they're too happy at home checking Facebook, playing apps, playing on games, and should be out aggressively seeking new jobs to help the economy recover from the last 4 years. This article is talking about 25 to 34-year-olds that live with their parents and only support additional gripes around the utilization of this generation. To me, the core problem of the generation is clear. We are entitled. I don't deny these behaviors. The gentleman that wrote this is actually a member of Gen Y. We don't deny these behaviors, but having recently finished researching and writing a book on career advice, I have a different explanation. The problem is not that we're intrinsically selfish and entitled, it is that we've been misinformed. That's fair. So the schools started falling off drastically after the 90s. So in the 90s, you had still what you had prior to that. You had civics, which taught you about government. It taught you about the 3 different branches of government. It taught these things. That was replaced with social studies. You had biology and physical sciences, which was replaced in 2000 with earth sciences. So you started losing the specific things that were important: grammar, writing in cursive, those type things, which taught you how to be eloquent in how you speak and how you respond to people. Words have been shortened to phrases or to letters. It's ridiculous what generationally we're trying to do to the intelligence of human beings. And this is done on purpose. Think. Back in Shakespeare's time, people had in their vocabulary 40 to 90,000 words, okay? Modern Americans use less than 4,000 words, all right? And if you're not reading regularly, you're just going to devolve from that. So as you can see, I'm always surrounded in books. Books take over 3 rooms in my house at the moment. And if I don't do something soon, I'm going to be taking over 4. But the reason I say that is I do that to keep expanding on the knowledge I have and expanding on the words that I know and what I utilize, because that keeps your brain and the synapses in your brain challenged and keeps those things firing like they should be. This article says Generation Y was raised in a period where follow your passion become pervasive in career advice. The chart below, generated using Google's Nggram viewer, there's a chart here that shows the uptick at around 2000, and it mimics exactly what I just said about education falling off in 2000. From 2000 up to 2008, Generation Y was in its formative schooling years. Those subjects changed. Like I told you, the phrase follow your passion turns out to be surprisingly difficult. This guy uses the word pernicious, which is a good word. But since people might not understand what that means, I'm going to say difficult. It's hard to argue that, of course, against the general idea that you should aim for fulfilling working life. But this phrase requires something more. So Gen X grew up in a period of time where there were still people, everybody had a farmer in the family that they knew. Okay, everyone had rural family. People that lived in cities had rural family. You grew up in a way where nobody was standing over you. Literally, your parents would drop you off somewhere with $4 and say, have a good time, and they'd come back 5 hours later to pick you up. It wasn't any of this helicopter parents that are staying over, micromanaging I mean, you basically just had to go out there as a child and just not die, okay? Now the world's a much different place. Okay, you can't do that so much because of kidnapping and all that's increased because our government's failed to do the one thing government should do, which is increase the safety for American citizens. And what they've tried to do is attack citizens and try to take away our rights instead of secure the borders, secure the schools, secure things that would be attacked by these folks in acts of terrorism. And I say all that because the mindset changed through that. When I was a young kid, the Constitution was taught in schools. Every day we said a prayer, and every day we did the Pledge of Allegiance before we started school. Every day. Now the 10 Commandments have been removed from school. People don't pray. They don't study the Constitution. So kids these days don't see the value in the Constitution. And generations since Generation Y can't tell you the capitals of the states that they live in. They can't tell you which country is above us or below us. Now, this is not all. You can watch the videos on YouTube if you want to. And it makes the world think that we're a bunch of morons because this generation has started this seeking my purpose and finding myself nonsense that's from the 60s. And that's the other thing, too, guys. Everything is always cyclical. But the issue is the quality of the foods and those type things is continuing to degrade. Cancers and illnesses are continue to increase. Generation Y has the largest numerical group that are going through depression and anxiety and all these things that are preventing them from living normal lives. The largest group, and they represent a quarter of the workforce. So when you think about that, it's no wonder that people are having difficulty staying in the workforce. Found implication that causes damage. When people this age studied what they do for a living, they found that in most cases their passion develops slowly over unexpected, complicated paths. This person's talking about they found someone who loves their career, but before they become very good at it, expertise generates many different engaging traits such as respect, impact, and autonomy. And the process of becoming good can be frustrating and take years. So it's saying that Generation Y is too fleeting and doesn't stay in for the long run. The other stages of a fantastic career might not feel fantastic at all. This is a fact. A reality that clashes with the fantasy world implied the advice to follow your passion. An alternative universe where there is a perfect job waiting for you, one that you'll love right away once you discover it. See, the fantasy world piece, I think, is what's gotten out of hand. And Gen Y is not the worst. The group that came after him is far worse than that. But the idea that you would go out, I grew up thinking, I want to do something where I can have an impact and prove what other people are doing. So I became a business person. I became someone who built businesses. Then I spent a decade moving and going around and fixing broken businesses. And now I'm consulting people on those businesses. I'm taking that experience and trying to do the same thing where I'm helping as many people as I can. In this situation, you have people, instead of worrying about helping others, they're out trying to find their passion. Let me tell you the secret to working in a way that's favorable and valuable. What you do is you find a gig where you solve a problem for someone. okay? And the way you get better and find your passion is you solve more problems for more people. And if you do that, you'll become a doer. And I talk about that all the time. There are not a lot of doers in the world. There's a lot of people who want to grade doers. There's a lot of people who want to put red tape around doers. There's a lot of people that are sitting back to judge and criticize doers, because when you do nothing, there's nothing to criticize. But people that are doers are going to have things come against them. There's going to be problems. There's going to be bad press and those type things that happen because they are doers. That's how that works. And anybody that had any relationship with more than 3 people, you know how quickly relationships go wrong. And at the end of the day, all that may be noise, but it still will allow people to throw darts at you if you're a doer, because you'll have an impact on more and more people. And as long as you're having a positive impact, that will be what you can build into a career and sell as a career. So this is saying the tough skill building phase can provide the foundation for a wonderful career, but in this common scenario, the follow your passion dogma will tell you that this work is not immediately enjoyable, therefore it's not your passion. So basically it's saying that these people quit because things are difficult in the beginning, so they get gone. We also like, talking about Gen Y, sophisticated way to discuss the role of serendipity in building a passionate pursuit. And he goes into Steve Jobs' example. In his off-site Stanford commencement address, told the crowd not to settle for anything less than work they loved. Jobs clearly loved building Apple, but as his biographers reveal, he stumbled in this career path at a time when he was more concerned with the issues of philosophy and Eastern mysticism. This is a more complicated story than him simply following a clear pre-existing passion, but it's a story that we need to tell more. So here's what I would say for Gen Y that's having these difficulties trying to live on hope and a dream. If you are wise, you try to take wisdom from other people, and you're watching these videos, so this is one way to do it. I'm an old guy, see that gray? I take my wisdom from many different sources. You see all the different books. I read constantly. There's always, like right now, there's 6 books on my desk. There's 3 in the other room that I'm reading. I read between 4 and 7 at a time, because it's just like a TV channel. You get tired of reading one thing, so you put your bookmark in that, set it down, and you pick up another one. The idea is that just like changing channels, you go through different things and you pay attention to that, and you can expand your mind by doing those type things. But the biggest piece is, in reading, you're taking education from someone that you can't interrupt. So if your phone's going off and all these things, if you're reading, put the phone in the other room. And I tell people this often. They're like, well, I read on my phone. I read on my, every time you get some type of notice, you've broken the attention you're putting. Do yourself a favor, put all the electronics away and read a book in a room away from the electronics, and be engaged in that so you can learn from it. If you're doing that, you can gain a lot of wisdom, so you're not tripping up over the nonsense around serendipity, around something that's going to make you feel good. Here's the other point too. Steve Jobs wasn't a great guy. Okay, if you lived through the time that Steve Jobs was who he was, and before he died, what people at Apple said about him, and he was fired and then came back, right? And they stole a bunch of ideas and they bought a bunch of ideas. That's how Apple and Microsoft became so uber powerful. They paid smaller companies off, bought smaller companies, basically mined and fleeced those companies for the good ideas and shut the rest, which is what companies do, and that's how you build your portfolio. So what I'm saying is the serendipity thing doesn't really exist, okay? Even if you think about this, doctors and dentists lead the world in suicide, right? Makes no sense in a profession. Makes no sense. But when you start talking to dentists and do consulting with dentists, it's because they don't have the business education they needed before they opened their business. And here's the opposite side of that. You're a doctor, you're a dentist, you're a surgeon, you're those type people. When you're not at work, you're not earning, right? So if you get hurt, if you get injured, you don't have insurance to cover it. You don't have insurance that covers your salary or your wage, your monthly expectation, then guess what? You're not making money those months. So then those people can become depressed, get in trouble with bills, etc., etc. So to find your bliss, what you should do is get wisdom from others. So read the Bible, read Proverbs. Tons of good wisdom in Proverbs. Read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. That book, if you read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, it's going to teach you tons of things about human nature that was written 1,000 years ago. The Bible was written nearly 3,000 years ago, some 1,500. But the idea is this is stuff that has stood for millennium. okay, for over 1,000 years. This is stuff that when you read it, you're going to be blown away because you're living through the same stuff today. And that's how you know it's good wisdom that's going to come to you. And nothing in that does it say anything about seeking workout that is your bliss. It says do something that is true, that makes you feel wholesome, that you're giving a contribution to, that you're improving someone else's life, because when you're doing that, you're building a career. And if you get better at taking care of others and helping others, you get to build a career on that, and that is continual work. It basically feeds itself. If you're doing things that's just about your bliss and all that, that's a temporary thing. It's not going to pay much. It's not going to sustain itself. So, How to Win Friends and Influence People is a book that you should read. I'm trying to think of anything else that jumps out in my mind. Robert Carras, In Business Like in Life, you don't get what you deserve, get what you negotiate. That's another good book. So try those things and start getting some wisdom. Here's what I would say to the people that are hyper critical of this generation. You have to understand your workforce, period. Everything can be generationally expected, but individuals succeed and do better at different things based on their individual talents, skills, and interests. So what I've found to be the case across all generations, if you stick to treating the individual like the individual wants to be treated, and this is to the employers or to the folks that own businesses, you don't have to worry about the generational questions. You have to give the guidance so people can feel comfortable. Psychological safety matters. If you can do that for these groups of people, they can last longer. Right now, this Generation Y is turning over faster than any other generation. It's because the 10 years before they got into the workforce, they were told to find your bliss. And the 10 years before they were getting in the workforce, companies started cutting benefits, started cutting pensions and doing things like that. So people started jumping from job to job. So you had career tenure shorting itself and getting shorter. And then you had a generation being released saying, go find your bliss. Those two things don't match well, because there's reasons to stay at a company that reinvest into you where people stay 10, 15, and 20 years. There's not a lot of companies that are like that anymore. Most companies expect 2 to 5 years out of you, and then you're out. Doesn't matter how you perform, doesn't matter how good you are, you can work yourself to a point that they can hire 2 people younger than you to take the salary that you would get. So that's how that works. It's a vicious cycle. That's why I suggest find a way that and it doesn't matter that you're a doer. Businesses change paths, right? So you may be a doer and you can get things done following this path, but overnight a company might decide they want to take this path instead. So you may be 110% the right fit and the best person in this role, but now the company's going this way. It is what it is. Things happen like that. So add a value, make sure you're able to document the value you're adding and how it can impact others. And that's the best way to find a career that's going to be inspiring to you and allow you to have success where you're going to be able to sustain that and hopefully find your bliss. I'm Ben. If you like subject matter such as this, please like, please subscribe. Be good.